This is Let's Talk About Health in Africa on Utano podcast with me, Lenias Hwenda. Experiencing racial discrimination is a lived experience of many Black people living in white societies. It takes a heavy emotional toll for those who experience it and leaves a trail of suffering that leads to chronic stress, anxiety, depression, and trauma. My guest today is a remarkable woman who is writing about racism, the subject that is often taboo and one that society generally ignores. Rebecca Stevens Alder is a highly accomplished senior pharmaceutical executive who has been leading global efforts to improve access to medicines by some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. She has assumed a variety of roles ranging from government affairs, corporate partnerships, and global health financing. Her most recent role being the head of health financing, health equity, and global health partnerships at the French pharmaceutical company Sanofi. Rebecca is one of the most passionate social justice activists that I know. She engages social justice issues both politically as a member of the Liberty and Social Justice Party in Geneva, but also as a prolific anti-racism writer. She writes a blog called Diary of a Black Woman in a White World, which I personally read and follow. And I have shared it with family and friends because I learned so much from Rebecca's reflections and thought leadership on this issue. But today she's here not to talk about her career as a highly accomplished pharmaceutical executive, but instead we'll be talking about her writing on racism and how it impacts mental health of Black people at the receiving end of it in the workplace and in everyday life. Rebecca, welcome to Let's Talk About Health in Africa on Utano podcast. It's my pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, Lenias, for inviting me to the program. I'm so happy to be here.
Wonderful. Now, Rebecca, you have been writing about your lived experience of racism, and my heart breaks every time I read one of your stories that you're putting out. What got you started on this journey?
So, I've lived in Switzerland since I was 9 years old. I came here from Sierra Leone in West Africa as a child. My mother was hired to work for the International Labour Office. And I remember getting to Switzerland at the age of 9, and I had no idea what racism was. I was a little eager, little Black African girl and got to Geneva, and almost immediately in school, white students started calling me names. And I remember thinking to myself, why? It was such a strange thing as a child to encounter racism for the very first time. So, having lived most of my life here, I have encountered, unfortunately, racism on several different occasions. And in 2020, following George Floyd's murder in the US, all these feelings started coming to the surface. And I began to realize that I had to write about the racism that I had encountered, not only in Switzerland, but in other parts around the world. And I realized that it was important for me to get this, in a way, out of my system, but to also talk about it because I realized so many other people had similar experiences. So I've always been a writer since I could write at the age of 4. I've been writing. And I said, how do I personally contribute to talking about racism, to no longer making it a taboo subject, to making people realize that racism really hurts and it destroys lives? And so I decided that my pen is mighty, my voice is mighty. And as a Black woman, the way I could contribute to the fight against racism was by writing about it. Because I think that by writing about it, by sensitizing people to racism, you're already contributing to fighting the scourge itself. So that's the reason I started this blog. And from my very first article, I got feedback from people saying, wow, you're talking to my experience. You were talking to what I have lived through. And people would say that they didn't have the courage to write about it or to even talk about it because they were afraid for their jobs. They were afraid they would lose friends.
Mm.
And they felt that I was giving them a voice. And so from then, of course, a great responsibility, which was to continue to give a voice to Black women, to continue to share our experiences, or at least my experience. And if it can help others see that they're seen, it can help others overcome some of the trauma of racism, then that's my mission and that's my task. And I'm happy, very happy to do it and to help others.
No, congratulations. It's really great work, and of course you are speaking for millions of people out there who cannot speak of their own experience, and that in itself is often quite healing for people to know that they are not alone in their experiences. Now, how has your life changed since you started writing about this?
I've found within me, I've always been somebody who's always been very outspoken and courageous and willing to say the things that others don't want to say. And when I wrote the first article, I'll be very transparent, Lenias. I was afraid. I was very afraid. I said, "Oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me?"
Mm,
But somehow within me, the more I started writing, the more courage I felt. And that in a way was therapeutic to me because I see racism. Yes, it's painful and it hurts when it happens. But what this has done to me, it has helped me process it better. And to explain that in a better way, I would say it has helped me see that racism, yes, it happens, but I no longer, if something happens, if a racist activity happens to me, I won't spend the whole day ruminating about it anymore. I'll say, well, that person was racist. That's that person, but not everybody is. So I think it helps me actually deal with racism a bit better and get over it a bit better. And also, it's given me a lot of self confidence that my voice is heard and people can relate to my voice. So that has also helped me develop as a person in terms of my personal transformation as well. So, and then I think a third thing, which is the most important for me, it's vis-a-vis my children,
mm,
that they see the courage that I take in divulging, and talking about racism.
mm.
In a way, it also gives them that self-confidence as well, and it makes them very proud of me. And that's one of the best comments I've received from my children is them saying, "Mommy, so proud of you that you're
Mm.
writing about this." And that, as a mother and as a woman, has been very beneficial to me personally.
That's wonderful because it can be very difficult to explain these experiences to young children and help them to make sense of it. And I guess it's great if they actually are getting that message of being able to advocate for themselves and watching you do it and knowing that they can too.
Mhm.
Now, um, you've you are an accomplished pharmaceutical executive, and you have been, in the corporate environment
Mhm.
for quite a long time. Talk to us about your personal experiences of racism in the global health corporate environment, and whether that's different from the everyday racism one would encounter on the street.
Yes, what I've observed in my different roles is this lack of knowledge about um, Black people, Black women in particular.
Mm,
And I what I understand from that is because I mean we have role models like Michelle Obama
mm,
and Oprah Winfrey, and they're out there in the world. But I think there's a lack of knowledge about the potential that Black women have. And in the corporate environment, very often what I've found is so we have teams that go to Africa and maybe they see Black or African women in villages, and somehow, they think that this is where we should all be. They have this sort of like stereotypical image that we should all be in a village somewhere. And so when they see you in a corporate environment, they disrespect you because they somehow think that you are lower than they are. And this is just the reality. And I've had that in my experience where people have said stuff to me like, "What are you doing here? And how did you get here to Switzerland?" Which is, of course, very off-putting. And it could be very hurtful to hear that type of thing.
yes.
But I decided that what I was going to do was to change their narrative about Black and African women and Black people overall.
Yes.
And of course, I've put a lot of pressure on myself to deliver impeccable work, for them
Mhm.
to really see that their vision of me or the form of vision that they had is completely wrong. And that as Africans, as we are just as good and even better in many cases.
Yeah.
And we have expertise and we have knowledge. And we also know, because we are so connected to our countries like you are,
Mhm.
that we also know what the challenges are in our countries and what, some of the best solutions are to resolve those challenges.
Yes.
I've spent most of my career really correcting that narrative,
Mhm.
making sure people understand that I bring value and that there's so many other people like me in the world that could work for a company in these companies and also deliver that same value. So that's what I've done, is really try to change this narrative, which I think was, and I think Chimamanda, the author, Nigerian author, talks a lot about this. The single narrative. There's never a single narrative about anybody.
Yes.
Multiple narratives about everybody. I could be an African doctor. I could be an African sociologist. I can be an African billionaire. So really, I think what's important for us as Africans, as Black people in the world, is to really let other people see we are not just one narrative. We are
Yes.
several narratives. We are a multitude of different narratives and characters and potential. And this is really what I've sought to do in the corporate world throughout my whole entire career.
And so your approach to really try to deliver excellence when you're doing your job, has it always worked when you've done that? Is it always acknowledged that you've done a great job here? Well done.
It's not always acknowledged, and one thing I would say is often, um, sometimes it even turns on me in the sense that I'm seen as a threat, because I constantly want to deliver this excellence, then others see this as a threat. The thing is, I think my need for excellence is not just, I didn't just inherit that from my upbringing. I think it's also just part of my character. If you're going to do something, do it well. So it has gotten me into trouble. There have been times, of course, I've had a pat on the back and been told, great. But more times, more often, it's been seen as, why does she always want to work so hard? Why does she always want to deliver excellence? And sometimes seen with a little bit of suspicion.
Yes.
But as I always say, this is the way I was raised. And for me, excellence, when you do something so well, it gives me so much satisfaction to do it. So it's not about other people or trying to be a threat to others. It's about me trying to surpass myself. It is something that's within me. But it hasn't always, to answer your question specifically, no, not always the pat on the back. Sometimes more the kick out the door.
Yeah, they say excellence is an attitude. So obviously, you're bringing that attitude to work, and sometimes you find that you're punished for it. Now, how do you manage not to internalize a lot of these negative experiences that you get? Whether you're excelling or just experiencing microaggressions from the random people on the street. How do you manage to stay so untouched by it, and to remind yourself that it's not you?
Yeah. So a lot of the writing has helped me with that. You asked that question earlier. A lot of my writing has helped me with that, but also because I have a strong sense of self. And I think upbringing is very, very important. I grew up in a family where I had excellence in front of me day in, day out. And generations of women that have really excelled. My grandmother was a school teacher, my mother an electrical engineer. Around me, my sisters are PhDs, and so I've always had that excellence. So in my mind, I've always known that being a Black woman, um, I wasn't lesser than anybody else.
Mm,
That has always been, I think, written or engraved into my DNA. So whenever people treat me badly, whenever this racism comes up with this microaggression, I usually just say, well, that's that person's problem. It's not my
yes.
problem. So it doesn't permeate, it doesn't come into me, it doesn't make me feel lesser or make me feel I'm not as good. I would say that I just see that as the other person's problem. So
Yes.
yes, it takes a great deal of courage. And I must admit, in my jobs, I've often had the opportunity to travel to Africa.
Mm.
That has always been energizing for me. Every single trip. Every single trip has just given me this power to come back and put up with some of the racism I face here. So I think having good role models, um, being able to go back to my continent quite often and to
Mm.
see what we are doing there, what we do has really been helpful, and also the capacity to just build a tougher skin and sort of say, well, if this person is racist, well, that's their problem and that's their illness and it's not mine. But I must admit it's not always easy. There's some days where I'm like, I'm just not going to leave my house because I just don't want to even stand a chance of running into this type of thing.
Yeah.
So that happens like once or twice a year when I just sort of stay put because I know I'm safe at my place. But I
Yes.
think overall, it's just knowing inside of me, just knowing how much value I bring and how much value I represent in the world. That has been very, very helpful. And what I see in Geneva, in many spots of Switzerland right now, is there's a huge mental health crisis, as you know.
Yes.
The other day, I went to a mental health, one of the biggest institutions here in Geneva,
Mm.
and to my dismay, what I discovered is the majority of patients there are actually Black patients.
Mm.
And these are kids, their parents came to Switzerland maybe 10, 20 years ago. They were born here and they are not anchored. They don't have an anchor because they're
Yes.
not treated like Swiss citizens. They've never been back home and they're struggling. They're really struggling from a mental health perspective. And
Yes.
this is a field that I've been thinking about maybe taking up some work in is how do I help this generation of, Swiss African kids that are really suffering and are heavily medicated in mental health institutions today
Mm.
just because they haven't had that anchor and that they have been victims of racism and they don't even understand why because they've only ever lived here, they've only ever known.
Yes.
And so I've been thinking about how do I play a role in helping this generation because it is a lot of people that are going through this type of difficulty right now.
Yes, it is clearly the anchor that helped you because you spent part of your childhood at home in Sierra Leone, and you've been able to go back and recharge and re-anchor yourself. What would you say to one of these young people that you're seeing in mental health institutions who really feel in between places? They don't belong there because they never lived in another country. They grew up here, but they're not accepted here as part of the society, and they don't feel the confidence to be able to defend themselves, I guess, in the same way that someone with that anchor and that innate self identity has. What are some of the tools that they could perhaps utilize to try to find themselves again?
Yeah, so what we've been doing, I have a few friends that have set up an institution here in Switzerland called the African Village. And what they do is they bring they're bringing younger kids right now, very young kids in to really learn about their culture, to learn
Yes.
about whether it's Patrice Lumumba, but all of or Nelson Mandela, or all the people that were so key to African history. And
Yes.
so they're bringing them in and teaching them that history. They're bringing them in and getting them to listen to African fables, African stories, which is really important because we have such a strong culture of African fables, which teach so many life lessons.
Yes.
And also showing them the different narratives of Africa. So instead of showing the poverty or the poor child in Africa, in
Mm.
Ethiopia dying of hunger, showing them the images of Johannesburg or Kenya and showing them these societies. I call it Wakandarizing, these kids to show them that, there is a Wakanda in Africa, if I can use that term.
Yes.
At the end of the day, though, I think the most important thing for these children is to come back to Africa, is to have
Yes.
a trip to the continent to really see for themselves this place exists. And there are people that they could even be your doppelganger, they can look exactly like you, and they live on this continent. And this continent is the continent of the future. When you look at, the population growth, when you look at all the entrepreneurship, so giving them a sense of pride, I think it's a sense
Yes.
of pride that they're lacking because if you spent so many years with people telling you that your continent is no good and you are no good, you begin to
Mm.
believe that type of thing.
Yes.
But
Yes.
if you go to the continent and you see the potential and you see what you can do there, I think that gives you that sense of pride and that inner strength to really confront all of those negative messages and narratives.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. And when we come back, I'm going to ask Rebecca about her coping mechanisms and how people can protect their mental well-being in the face of racism. What's the one thing that your experience of racism growing up in Switzerland and living there has taught you about yourself, about survival?
I think what it's taught me at the end of the day is you're going to be in life, you're going to face difficult situations. You're going to face situations that are really going to test you as a human being. And I've always, I mean, all of this could have made me a very bitter person. I could have been a very bitter person, locked up at home, but I haven't allowed it to change me. You face adversity, and when you face adversity, it can alter you in many, many ways.
Yes.
I've always stayed the person that I am. I have not changed. If you ask me in a million years, would I want to be a white person instead of a black person because maybe my life would be easier? I would say I would want to be born over and over and over again as a black woman. I would never change, who I am and how I was born. So I think it's taught me to deal with adversity. It's taught me to be lonely because I've been in situations where I've been very lonely. You know, you in a corner and lonely, and sometimes it's difficult to be alone and to be excluded. But it's taught me to have that inner strength to be able to manage being alone. I can travel anywhere in the world alone, and I don't suffer from loneliness because I have had experiences with loneliness. Not necessarily a great thing, but it's taught me to be quite strong, I believe. And also, I think that racism has also taught me that it's also taught me the in a way, what I've seen is when you have racism, it just makes you so much weaker. It just in companies in which I've worked, the best teams I've worked in, Lenias, have been diverse teams. Those are the best teams. So it's actually also shown me just by proof that when you have diversity, when you welcome others, you basically build much stronger teams that are a lot more successful as well. So I don't like the word resilience because sometimes resilience is seen as just like, well, just accepting the way it is. Well, it's taught me resilience, and resilience from my perspective is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
So many different things. Of course, there are times when it's hurtful when I'm with my kids and I face racism. That's tough. It's tough. It's difficult. But at the same time, I think I've done a good job in that they understand that racism is not normal. They understand that, it's the racist that has the problem and not their mom.
Yes. Yes. And on the days, Rebecca, the hard days when you just can't face leaving your house and going out there, clearly it does take a toll on your mental health, on one's mental health, whoever experiences, many of us who experience racism in various contexts, whether we're traveling in Europe or not. Talk to me about how all of these experience being in this space where you are immersed in racism every day, every time you step out of your door, you are likely to experience it. What does that do to your mental health?
I think, it does take a toll on my mental health, but I have found mechanisms to counter that. And the mechanisms are numerous. There are people like you, Lenias. I will think about you and I'll think about the podcast. I'll think about some of my favorite authors. So, I generally, I do a lot of self-care. So what I do is I counter that. I don't stay in it. So if I go out and this racism that happens, I don't come home and think about it the whole time. I'm going to think about my role models. I'm going to watch an uplifting film. I'm going to listen to some uplifting music. I'm going to maybe do a sauna or go to the gym. I use a lot of sports to sort of counter this, because I think sports is, as you know, usually just increases your dopamine levels. So I use sports a lot to counter this type of thing. So I have an arsenal of different tools that I use to really counter racism. And then I speak to my friends. If something happens, I'm having a really bad day, I'm going to speak to somebody I know will, understand that I've been through racism, and we'll have a conversation about it. So in a way, I seek forms of therapy, maybe not necessarily seen as like a therapist, but I will seek forms of peer therapy, or just looking at, yourself and your accomplishments, looking at your podcast, and so these are the different tools that I use personally to overcome racism and to counter it. I try not to stay in it for too long, because that would be giving power to the person who was racist. And I don't want to give my power to somebody that, from my perspective, is definitely unwell. So that's what I do, just having these different tools, and self-care and sports, and maybe having a nice meal or cooking, because I love to cook, reading, listening a lot to Viola Davis. I think she has quite a few. I love what she says about, racism and empowerment, so those are the different tools that I use to survive in the world.
Wonderful. So, just doing stuff you enjoy, surrounding yourself with people who provide you with energy. Michelle Obama talks a lot about this in her book, The Light You Carry, the importance of having a network that does different things for you, people you can call when you're feeling down, and so perhaps that's a really one of the most powerful tools, being mindful of the people in your space and the kind of energy they bring to that. So talk to me about, obviously you've thought about this, you're a thought leader on the issue of racism. What do you think drives racism, and what is the biggest misconception about Black people, their contributions in white societies, and how that is perceived, and how that feeds into the challenge of racism?
Yeah, so when I started writing about racism, I studied sociology in university, and for me, when I studied it at the time a while back, I just thought, well, it was just an interpersonal thing. Some people just don't like you because you have a different color. But as I started to study racism per se over 3 years ago, I began to understand what it was all about, and it's about power. It's always been about power. And when you look back, if you look back about maybe 3 or 4 centuries ago, it didn't exist. And why, and you begin to study, why did it come to be? So, you have these periods when the big exploration begins, when the European countries start running out of money and decide, we want to go find gold, across the sea, across the ocean.
Yes.
And then there's the whole thing with the transatlantic slave trade. And the thing is, they couldn't enslave Africans, if we were seen as human beings, as other human beings. It was impossible for them to enslave us, because nobody would have accepted that. So clearly, racism was invented to sort of make people feel that we were inferior. So the whole idea of racism, the whole concept of it, is something that was man-made and created to justify enslaving Africans. And that's how it all started. And over time, the message has constantly been rehashed, whether it's in the Jim Crow South, whether it's in doing apartheid, to basically be able to oppress us. That was the only way that we could be oppressed, is we were seen as being lesser. So the minute you understand that this is why racism was created and exist, then you begin to understand, how do you dismantle it? It's a power. It's really about power. One race, having power over another.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and so it's and people that are racist are people that have absorbed this, or have been brainwashed by this quite a bit. And I talk about it in the work that I do. White supremacy, which is, I would say, the parent of racism, because white supremacy invented this, is something that is a disease that affects not only white people, but it affects brown and Black people, because you can find Black people that are trying to lighten their skin, or you can find the colorism where you have this situation where Black people think that lighter Black people are better than darker Black people. So racism for me is that it's really man-made and constructed. But I think that what we're seeing in the world these days, and you're seeing it yourself, even with the music that people are listening to, with the food that people want to eat, you're having this mass, this whole group, and it's becoming bigger and bigger of people that are pushing up against this and questioning racism. They'll still always be the racist. I think they'll still be here. But I think we're having a majority of people in the world that are dancing to African music, listening to African food, and realizing that racism is a construct. And so this is why I'm optimistic. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think that we are moving towards a post-racial society. This will eventually happen. But that power structure, the more powerful Africa becomes with all of our natural resources, and if we can organize ourselves better, I can bet you that racism per se will not hold, because the world knows that we're human beings. The world knows that we bleed like everybody else. And we're going to get to a stage where there will be a minute few that are still racist, but the majority, I believe, will definitely begin to, will no longer be racist, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, so there is hope. You see a lot of hope. It's what I love about your work, that you're always hopeful about the changes that can occur if with social activism, and always shining a light on this issue and the toll that it takes on people who are experiencing it. But now you mentioned the internalization of racism that drives even Black people to treat others to behave in ways that are hating themselves, whitening your skin, or and exposing yourself to all kinds of health challenges that comes with the damage that comes out of that. Now, if racism is about power, and and I guess in a power dynamic, one has to cede power for somebody to take the power. How do you keep the power? How does what's your advice? How do you not give up that power that somebody is trying to have over you?
Well, by just knowing within me that that I am just as good or even better, by knowing within me the value that I have, the value of being in this beautiful skin, by seeing, by also, all of our contributions, most of the contributions that Black people have made to this world have been erased. Knowing my history is very, very important. So all of these different things don't allow that power to anybody to exert any type of power over me. So I think it's really about knowing your identity and who you are. And I think that people that are trying to lighten their skin or to do certain things, I think these are people that don't know their identity, or they're not comfortable with their identity. And so I think it's work. I definitely don't think it's something, I think your parents can impart to you your identity. But then when I coming back to these kids that are in these mental homes here in Switzerland, their parents are often working like 10, 12-hour days.
Yes.
And are not at home very often to impart that identity. I think, and this is, I mean, as a sociologist, this is what is important, the role of the family in all of this, in basically giving you that identity. And if, unfortunately, if your family is not strong, or you don't see them often, it's difficult to build that identity. So I think for me personally, it's about knowing who I am, knowing and being proud of my identity, and not ceding that power to anybody else. I think that's the key. But it's not always easy to get to this place. I mean, I know I'm a certain age, I'm no longer 20, so of course it's been a life experience of learning this. And what I say about Switzerland is, even though I live here and I'm a Swiss citizen, I mean, this weekend I was somewhere in the Alps, and I was supposed to take a bus from point A to point B. And when I tried to get into the bus in point A, the driver told me I couldn't come on the bus. He said, no, he says, you can't come on this bus. And I was trying to get on this bus, and I remember there were some small kids on the bus, and I said, I don't want to make too much of a stir. I don't want to make so much of a big deal. In the end, this guy ended up leaving without me. It was a clear act of racism. It was clearly a horrendous experience. So for me, it's also knowing that even though I'm citizen here and I pay my taxes here and stuff like that,
Mm.
also knowing that somehow um, I will never ever be fully accepted here. And there's another place in the world in which I would always be fully accepted. That's in Sierra Leone, and that's home.
Yes.
And just knowing the difference, just being aware of, just being aware of that simple fact that, people will never fully accept me here. As sad as it seems, I mean, you need to be aware of that, because if you think I will be fully accepted, my life will be wonderful, I think you're fooling yourself, and then you're
Mm.
setting yourself up for disappointment, and you're setting yourself up for depression at the end of the day, because this place is the way it is. It will change with time, as I said, but it's not going to change tomorrow.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Yes, yes. So that keeps you grounded, knowing that actually you have a place where you belong, and you
Yes.
don't have to explain yourself. Now, you speak about erasure of the contributions of Black people in white societies, and the kids that you're talking about in these mental health institutions are coming from homes where parents are working many hours and being absent, not being present for their children, to do jobs that contribute to Swiss society. You yourself are, amongst one of the top earners, I think, in Swiss society, and you tend to pay the highest amount of tax to contribute to this society, and yet those contributions are not acknowledged. And I saw one of your posts online where you were really railing and upset about the images of Black people in cages, and you were saying, we contribute to this society. I mean, what kind of conversation would you have? What would you say to the person who posts such an image, alongside the contributions, real monetary economic contributions that you bring to this society, and that many parents bring at the sacrifice of the well-being of their own children?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I would say is that image was largely upsetting. It was largely upsetting because I do all this work, anti-racism work, contribute to the society, and then, I've been here for about a good 40 years. And then I go to my mailbox, and in my mailbox is this brochure with these Black people, in yeah, as you say, just basically sitting on the floor, and there's a sign below this photo saying, no to immigration, all types of rubbish, but clearly very xenophobic, and clearly saying that Black people are the reason that we have an out of control immigration, that they are increasing. You know, I think the thing was they're coming in, and they're basically taking stuff away from the Swiss people, the good, wonderful Swiss people. So what type of a conversation would I have with somebody that, that does this type of thing? I mean, first of all, I think I need to be gather my senses, because this was very emotional for me when I saw this. I was very hurt by it, to be very honest. But what type of conversation would be base all of your arguments on facts. Stop using these populist arguments, which are basically trying to demonize Black people. Because the thing is, it's irresponsible. At the end of the day, you have people in the street that are going to be racist and going to hurt Black people because they believe that we are the source. We are the source of all their problems, when we're not. And in the case of Switzerland in particular, immigration into Switzerland, like Black people, it's not that high. So we are not the ones that are driving, all the problems that they were talking about in the brochure. There are other people that come into this country. So it's about, I think, telling these people to get their facts straight, and telling them out, actually, and I write about this in one of my articles, is about Swiss society is getting old, and they are not making enough children in this country. What that means is, in about 20 years, they're going to struggle to pay pensions for the people that are working today, people like myself. So what we should be doing in Switzerland is embracing immigration rather than the opposite, because we're going to need young people to work to pay for the pensions of the elderly. So saying to them, your arguments are completely wrong. You shouldn't be railing against immigration, because immigration is what is going to save this country at the end of the day. Without immigration, this country will become irrelevant because you won't have enough workers. So it's basically trying to bring them to a factual and a real argument, rather than a let's make sure there are no Black people that come into Switzerland, because that is it's that argument that they're pushing will actually lead to the destruction of this country, because this country will not exist without a population. So I think it's just coming with the real arguments, but still, it's still a sensitive issue for me, because I ask myself, what am I doing here? You know, should I actually even stay here? Should I go back to Sierra Leone or somewhere else? And it has made me think. One thing, Lenias, is I don't know if I want to retire here. I don't know if I want to find myself in an old people's home in Switzerland. I worry about how I would be treated in a place like that. So for me and for many others that are here, I think, we might end up coming home at the end of the day, even though I think coming home is probably going to be challenging as well, because we haven't lived home for a while. But at least we'll have respect, I think, back home than, here.
Yes, there's always a place for you. You can always come back. It may not be perfect, but you'll be treated with respect, and there'll be a meal on the table, and we'll look after you. So don't rule that out. Now, you talk about, this being an emotional issue, of course, in the way that it's presented to society. And I guess it's not only an emotional issue for you, but for the other people who are looking at the same flyer that you're looking at and thinking, geez, these Black people are to blame for climate change. It's been hot this summer. It's their fault. We have no jobs. It's their fault. How do you fight back such a message?
So concretely what we've done here in Switzerland is we've, for the very first time, all come together. So all the African associations, whether it's on the culture side, on the social justice side, all come together, and we've decided to sue the political party that issued this brochure. So it's the first time that I've seen this in my life here, that we all came together to do this. Now, of course, we still don't know if we're gonna win this or not, but at least what this has done is organize us. And I think that's important for the future, because I think we need to be organized, not only for these type of brochures, but to defend also our interests. I talked about the kids that are in these mental homes. You need to make sure that they are well taken care of. There's also another thing, is that we have a lot of elderly Black people here in Switzerland, and we also need to make sure that in future they're also going to be taken care of. So organizing and coming together is going to serve a big purpose for us in the end, to be able to be stronger and to fight these type of things together. So for me, at the end of the day, as horrible as this whole brochure was, I think it did serve a positive purpose, that maybe this political party had no idea what happened, is that it has brought us all together and made us much stronger. So in terms of future elections here in Switzerland, we can maybe support Black candidates more. We can all come together and vote for them. So I think we're going to just become bigger and bigger. And that's going to give us a lot more power in Swiss society, which I think we need, because just to be able to fight and to maybe even put in place laws, because a brochure like that you should never be able to put that in a brochure and put it in mailboxes across Switzerland. So maybe it's about also legislation, influencing policy, that it will no longer become it would be prohibited to actually even do that type of thing, to demonize any ethnic group or specific group of people. So in the end of the day, maybe it was a horrible thing, but the results of it have been, quite positive from my perspective.
Yeah, so you're really going out there and challenging this overt racism, but also putting these people on notice that you are not willing to be silent, to be demonized and just, cower in a corner, that you're willing to, you're upstanding members of this society and of your society, and you're willing to stand up to these kinds of, demonization that is completely unjustified. Now, someone said to me, sort of after George Floyd's killing, that oh wow, this is going to change everything. There's so much awareness that I think racism is going to be over. What would you say to such a person? Has the killing of George Floyd, did it change anything? And how has it impacted the racism that you have seen and experienced where you live, and of course around the world?
So I think the killing was just a moment of awareness. I think it really brought the issue of racism to the front, to the forefront. And so a lot of people that thought that racism was a thing of the past, white people in particular, began to realize, no, it's not a thing of the past. It's actually still here, and it's very present, and it influences lives. So I think that that helped a lot, and it really helped put racism in the center. Now, with that also, it helped bring around this whole movement of anti-racism, and so you have a lot of people that want to be anti-racist and want to contribute. But what I'm seeing is that it also created a backlash, and you're looking across Europe now, and a lot of extreme right parties are actually being elected into office. So for me, the way I define this is white supremacy that I mentioned earlier. With George Floyd, what's happened is they begin to see that maybe they're losing a little bit of control. Okay. And so what they're doing now is that they're pushing a lot more than they were pre-George Floyd.
Yes.
So they're organized and they're doing a lot more, and so the backlash is now you're going to have a lot more extreme right people, and so it's almost as if racism is even more today. It's actually more, it's not more today. People are less ashamed of saying that they're racist. So it's a lot more overt today. Somebody would call you the N-word to your face, and they don't really care, because they're like, not going to have any consequences. So while George Floyd has created an awareness about racism, there's also been a backlash in the sense that it has, from my perspective, it's emboldened the extreme right more, because they are afraid that the global majority is going to become more powerful. So I don't know if I explain it correctly. So for me, we're living in a time that is actually quite I wouldn't say it's dangerous, but I would say that with extreme right parties that are feeling more emboldened, I think Black people should be cautious, should be a lot more cautious, to not find themselves in situations where they are alone with these type of very aggressive, emboldened, I would say January the 6th, Capitol Hill type of characters. It's important also for our kids, whether they be mixed race or Black children, to make sure that they don't find themselves in environments where they can be harmed.
Yes.
I think that's really very important right now.
And that makes the work that you've started, organizing amongst yourselves to also push for some legislative changes and to make sure certain things don't happen. It becomes even more important to push harder against that backdrop where you have bolder racists who are proud to proclaim their hate for people who are not white. So I think, it's a balance. Now, your message to those racists, to those people who say, I am proud to be racist, they salute to Hitler, those kinds of people. What is your final message to them?
And my final message to them is, it's always going to be the same, is that definitely racism is an illness. It's if you're racist, it's that you are fundamentally ill. It's that you don't understand humanity. And if you're racist, you are part of the problem that's going to contribute to us having increase in global warming, to us having these global issues that will continue, because racism is basically a deterrent to human progress. So it's a disease, and I would actually say they need to actually go take a medicine against it. and they really, I mean, they need to take care of their mental health. It's not normal to be in that state. It's not something to be proud of. And if you're proud of it, is that you definitely have a mental illness. It is a mental illness in a way. And it's a contagious mental illness that they can pass on to their kids. So from my perspective, talking to racists is go take care of your health and go get better, because it's not normal to be in that state. It's not a normal thing and nothing to be proud of at all.
That's a great message, and also that's a good message to give to kids, to say that, you know, when you experience racism, these are just sick people,
Yeah.
so it's not you.
No, it's definitely not. It's definitely not kids at all. It is a sickness, and there's actually quite a lot of proof that it's a sickness.
Yes.
And there's a lot of work that's been done recently in the world of using, you know, I believe there was a study that was done using psychedelics to cure racist. And there's a really interesting study that came out this year that really shows that, you know, with one dose of a psychedelic, you know, somebody that's racist becomes a lot less racist, you know, because they begin to understand that we are one humanity. So for me, if with one dose of a psychedelic you can actually become less racist, that really actually points to how much of a disease you must have, you know, to be able to change after like a few hours of you know, of this medication. So yes, for me, it is an illness, and people need to be cured from it.
Yes, yes. No, you know, the work that you're doing, Rebecca, it's so important. It's so important, not just for Black people, for African people who live in white societies, but also for African people who are living here on the African continent, because, you know, we travel and we have to go into all kinds of spaces where we also experience racism. Now, you've embarked on this journey, and you are advocating, you're putting out content out there to sensitize people. To conclude, talk to us about what comes next for you. How are you planning to take this work forward, and how can people support you?
Yes. So I plan to continue to write about, you know, my experiences, but at one point in time, I do plan to talk about Black joy, because here I talk a lot about the trauma, but as you know, Lenias, there's always two sides to everything.
Mm.
So I want to move into Black joy and what makes me happy and some of the things that I've accomplished. I really want to talk about those experiences as well. I also want to help these kids that I'm talking about to be able to anchor themselves and to be proud of their African identities. So what happens next for me is to continue talking about, you know, what I've experienced, because I know it's helping people, but then to move into into talking about this is the future, or this is what the future can look like, you know,
Mm.
and to really show again another narrative, and to write a lot about Africa and the continent. I did write a bit about the African continent, and I realized, and this is so interesting, how racism is so pervasive. When I was writing about the African continent,
Mm.
and Africa was in the title of the articles, there was so much less readership of these articles.
Mm.
Less people
Interesting.
read these articles, which is so interesting because nobody sees that. I see the data, you know,
Mm.
and it's interesting. People love to read about about Black pain. If I write about Black joy, actually, there are less people that read it, which is interesting as well. So I will move into Black joy and writing about the continent and everything like that. So how to support me? It's really by taking out a subscription to my diary of a Black woman in a white world, whether it's a monthly or yearly subscription. That would really help me, because I really want to be able to not only give myself a voice, but I also want to bring other writers into my newsletter to talk about their experiences. You know, that would be my next stage, is how many, you know, more writers that can talk in different fields, for example,
Mm.
racism in academia, you know, racism in different areas of life. So I'd like to make it not only Rebecca's diary, but a diary for all Black women, um,
Yes.
about their lives. That's the next stage. And to do that, I would want to be able to also be able to pay these people to for their contributions, because that's also
Mm.
important for me, is to show Black women and Black people that there's value, they have value, and I want to be able to pay them properly for this. So it's really getting support for this newsletter so that we can grow it, we can bring more voices into it, and we can really pass messages, bring our messages into this so that people know racism isn't a thing of the past. It happens today, happens tomorrow. It's not just Rebecca's experiences, but Lenias has been through this. My friend Kim has been through this, so that we become this force and this sort of repertoire where people can go in and see these are their experiences, good and bad.
You're absolutely right. That it's something that many people experience. Many of us, we don't talk about it for so many reasons. You want the focus to be on the work that you're trying to do, and so sometimes you think, okay, just ignore these other things so that you can be focused, or you can get people to focus on some of the things that you're trying to put out there. But for sure, what you're doing is so important, because not all of us are able to talk about it and to advocate for it. But for sure, we can support, and everybody who's listening can support by reading the diary of a Black woman in a white world, taking out subscriptions and supporting in other ways as well in some of these initiatives that you are trying to put out there. And Rebecca, we hope that you continue this work. It matters so much for the world that we live in, not just for us, for our kids. I think this is work that can be foreseen to continue for generations. I don't think this work will be done in our lifetime or our children's lifetime. So we support you and keep going.
I wanted to add one more thing, Lenias, to
Yes.
thank you so much for your very kind words, and also for your support. Because it's, when I'm thinking about writing my articles, I'm thinking about you, and I'm thinking about other women that are really uplifting and supporting me. And that gives me a superpower, to know that there are Black women in the world that are supporting me. And if I could say something to end this, this blog, more than anything, is for us. It really is for us. It's for you to read my blog and say, this happened to me. There's nothing wrong with me.
Yes.
So it also happened to me. So to make us feel like we're not alone with these experiences, that there are other Black women in the world that have these experiences. So my blog is a dedication to us Black women, so that we don't feel alone, that we feel that we have a sisterhood. And I can understand that not everybody can write about this, their jobs, their mouths to feed. And honestly, I believe that I was put here in this world to do this. And so if I can carry the burden for my sisters that can't, I'm so happy to do that, and so happy to write about it. And so, yes, it's for us. It's a dedication for us, so that people know our experiences, so that the erasure of Black women doesn't continue, that we are out there on the World Wide Web where nothing can ever leave. It stays there, and it's permanent, that people can see our experiences. We're in their faces, whether they choose to read, to believe, to not believe. I don't care. This is really for us, that our experiences are part of that discourse and the AI algorithms that are running around there, that our voice is heard. And that's what's important for me about it. And that's why I continue it, because we will no longer be erased. We are part of this planet. We contribute so much. So our voice needs to be heard. So that's also the reason. It's a dedication to you and to us. That's why I will continue.
Rebecca Stevens Alder, thank you so much for coming on to Utano Podcast today.
Thank you so much, Lenias, for having me. Thank you very, very much.